crowd at the Chennai Marina. It's thousands of people strong. What started as a small agitation almost a day and a half ago has now grown into this large sort of celebration that everybody is taking part in.
என்ன சொல்றோம் அப்படினா டிமான்ஸ்ட்ரேஷன் இருக்கட்டும், ஆதார் கார்டு இம்ப்ளிமெண்ட் பண்றதா இருக்கு, எல்லாத்துலயும் வந்து கேஸ் மானியமா இருக்கட்டும், எல்லாத்துலயுமே வந்து தமிழக மக்கள் வந்து மத்திய அரசுக்கு வந்து சப்போர்ட் பண்ணிட்டு தான் இருக்கும். அவங்க என்ன சொல்றாங்களோ கேட்டு தான் இருக்கும். ஸோ எங்களுக்கு ஒரு பிரச்சனை வரப்போ மட்டும் எங்களை கார்னர் பண்ணி ஒதுக்கி பார்க்கறதுல எந்த வகையில் நியாயம் தெரியல. ஸோ அதை சொல்றதுக்கு தான், அழுத்தமா சொல்றதுக்கு தான் இந்த போராட்டமே.
Jallikattu has to be happen across the Tamil Nadu. It's our tradition, it's our culture. Please don't try to ban it. And the main reason you are supporting some of the foreign culture, some foreign country has been bought the beta here. You're supporting some foreign country. Why not the Indian people who
It's been 2 weeks since Mariam Khan spent a night at home. Despite the cold front passing over Delhi, she's come here to show her fierce disagreement with India's new citizenship law. This is the first time Mariam has taken part in any kind of protest. She usually has her hands full, looking after her 2 young daughters. But she says she's come to fight for their future as rightful Indians.
I don't know what my daughters are up to. I don't know anything about what's happening in my own house. My country needs me right now. All these women sitting here, I'm their voice, and they are mine.
The women of New Delhi's Shaheen Bagh neighborhood have spearheaded this protest. They take turns to make sure someone is always at the sit-in throughout the day. And it isn't all speeches and chants. Protesters are keeping the crowds entertained with music, movies, even readings of the Constitution. They say it's important for all of them to understand why they've assembled here. To protest the new law that makes religion a test of citizenship in secular India for the first time. And residents are pitching in by crowdfunding resources to provide medicine and food for protesters.
A very good morning, children. So today we're going to deal with chapter 5, when people rebel. What is the meaning of rebel? Well, let's understand that first. Let's say that you are at home right now and you spend most of the time in your mobile phone or your tablet. Well, your parent, your mom or dad calls you and tells it, see, from today you're not going to use your mobile phone for more than 2 hours, except for your studies. You're not going to play games. You're not going to talk to your friends. How will you feel? You have been playing games for quite a long time. You've been talking to your friends, chatting on WhatsApp and all those, and suddenly your parents tell that you cannot use your mobile phone henceforth more than 2 hours, except for the classes that you attend. How will you feel? So you definitely will not be happy. And if your parents consistently do that, if your parents make that a strict rule, what will you do? Well, some of you will resist eating. Well, some of you will fight with your parents, argue with them. Well, some of you will refuse to do the schoolwork. or whatever it is, end of the day, you don't cooperate with them or you argue with them. But all these stuff comes under the single word called rebel, that you oppose them, you raise your voice against them. And that is called rebel. Well, that is a simple explanation that I've given as it is concerned with a single person and you're a child. But imagine this word, rebel, when it comes to a huge number of people, a society, a state, a country, a continent. Imagine a whole continent or a country is suppressed. The people over there are controlled. They are being asked to follow something that they do not like. They've been forced to do something that they do not like. They're not happy with, like how you do not like, staying away from phone all the day, where you're controlled by your parents not to touch the phone. But imagine if a country faces that. What will they do? Let's understand that. Well, let's begin with the clips that you watched in the beginning of our video. The first one that you watched was the Jallikattu protest. So we already know a lot about it, the reasons behind the protest, that we demanded to lift the ban on a cultural or traditional sport called Jallikattu. With the second picture, you can see the farmers protesting. Yes, the second clip that you watched was about the farmers who marched towards New Delhi. Basically, the farmers demanded the central government to compensate them with the lands confiscated or procured by the government. A lot of amount pending to be paid back to the farmers. And a large number of farmers from Tamil Nadu participated in Delhi as well. Those farmers demanded the central government to compensate them for the drought because the monsoon failed for that year. So basically, it was a demand for compensation, so the farmers protested and they marched to Delhi. And the third one that you watched, the picture right in front of you, is in a place called Shaheen Bagh, where a huge number of women, mostly from Muslim community, and many Hindus and Christians, and a lot of women from other communities joined hands with them to show solidarity in protesting against the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, and the NCR, a National Citizenship Registry, where you all have heard a lot about it. You would have heard about the protests all over the country, but Shaheen Bagh is one of the most notable locations where the protest happened. Well, when we talk about protest or rebel, it doesn't mean that it happens only in India, or it has happened only in India. It has happened in many other continents and countries as well. I have got few examples for you here. The first one that you see here is the peasants' revolt. Peasants, I mean the farmers, right? They revolted where it happened in Essex in 1831. It's a way long back. It's been a very long time. Where the farmers marched to London and they destroyed the houses of government ministers. They had some political demands because at that time people were affected by a pandemic, like how we face coronavirus right now. But those days people were affected by flus, swine flus and plagues. So people were affected by pandemic, and poverty and bad administration resulted in a very bad economic situation. So the farmers protested against the government. Next, you see here, the picture here is a French Revolution. The French Revolution was a period of time in France where people overthrew the monarchy and took control of the government, where it took place almost 10 years. Well, you'll be learning a lot about French Revolution in your 10th standard. Well, the next picture is for the Boston Tea Party. Like the Boston Tea Party was a political protest that occurred the year 1773. Massachusetts, in America, where America was a colony, a British colony, like how India was a British colony. America was a British colony around in 1770s. So there was a tax imposed on tea because the British were worried that the Americans, their colony, who were under the control of British, were not purchasing the tea from British. Where did the British get the tea from? It's from us. We were one of the leading producers of tea. But the Americans denied buying the tea from the British. So British got infuriated and they imposed a lot of tax in the American tea trade. So the tea traders, they got angry and there was a protest. They called that as the Boston Tea Party. Well, and the last one is a civil rights movement where happened, it was an inspiration by the Martin Luther King. Well, this movement was to support the Afro-Americans because basically in America, the Afro-Americans face a lot of discrimination when it comes to job, when it comes to any opportunity. Even the children, they had to go to a different school than the white because the white had to attend a different school. The blacks were attending a different school. Even the blacks were not allowed to sit in the public transport if there is a white standing. And there were a lot of discriminations happening. And in support of the Afro-Americans, people started protesting, demanding equality. And that is what is called the civil rights movement. Well, we've gone through a lot of examples right now. What do we understand from this? We've gone through all around the world, Europe, India as well. There's one point that we understand that whenever the people's interest is affected, whenever the government, the authority tries to control the people, force them to do something that they do not like, if they curb their rights, if they curb their freedom, then the people will revolt. And now we're going to understand what happened in India. What did the British do to the people in India, and what particularly they did to the sepoys or the soldiers for them to revolt against the British? What injustice was caused to them? And what happened during the revolt? And what was the result and effect of the revolt? And that is what we will be dealing with this lesson, when people revolt. Let's have a look at the previous chapters dealt with. Maybe the tribals or the peasants who did the indigo cultivation. The tribals and the peasants were suppressed, their rights were curbed, their freedom was curbed, their livelihood was affected. They were forced by the British government to do what they wanted them to do. And thus, the Indigo Rebellion resulted, and the Munda Rebellion. So, the feel or the essence of rebel had already started all around the country because the British was trying to place their foot everywhere around the country. And when they tried to control, they faced revolt. And likewise, the tribals and the farmers. In this chapter, you're going to deal with the soldiers. What made them angry? What made them to revolt? But before we get into it, let's have a glance at the situation prevailed during that time, the kind of tension that prevailed during the time. Basically, the British were trying to curb the power of all authorities, the kings and the jamindars, or the village heads, leaders, or whatever. They tried to control them and get power from them. Maybe the subsidiary alliance or the doctrine of lapse, whatever the policies they came up with, they tried to paramount themselves of the supreme power of the country. While doing this, it badly affected the leaders. And we have few examples. Rani Lakshmi Bai, she tried to plead to the British government to allow her adopted son to get to the power, get to the throne, but the British denied it. The same thing happened with Nana Sahib, the son of Peshwa Bajirao, but the government denied it. And those leaders were important. But they, it created enmity among them. They were discontent with the British policy. And finally, the British occupied, or I would say, annexed Awadh. That was in Uttar Pradesh. You can see the map right now. You can see right Awadh, the center of Uttar Pradesh. That was annexed. And further, the British decided that the Mughals had a lot of importance in India. So they decided that they have to uproot the Mughal out of the Indian mind, as they slowly started doing it. First, they decided to remove the Mughal pictures on the coins that was being released at that time. And they tried to make them powerless. And they came up with the rule that any Mughal emperor, after Bahadur Shah Zafar, will become only the prince and princess. They can no more be the kings. And after Bahadur Shah Zafar, no more the Mughals will stay in the Red Fort where they used to stay, because that symbolizes power and control. When the British trying to achieve it, they are trying to show themselves that they are the paramount, the supreme power. But unfortunately, they were earning the hatred of the leaders. Well, not just them. It was also the peasants and the zamindars who were affected. The peasants, they lost their land. They were paying a lot of tax. They had no profit. The zamindars lost their power. They lost their authority. They were in turn paying a lot of money to the British as well. So they were in a huge upset as well. Now, this was the situation that was prevailing at that time. And adding into it, the soldiers, the heart of this chapter, because that, and through their perspective is what we're going to understand this lesson. Well, when we talk about soldiers, a sepoy, an Indian term we call them, they worked for the British. You need to understand that. They were Indians, but they were recruited by the British. It means they've given them a job to work as soldiers. Well, these sepoys who worked for the British, right, they were unhappy as well, because they were not happy with the salary that they were paid. They were not happy with the respect they got. They were not happy with any kind of convenience or compensations or offers that the British provided. They were not happy with any of those. And basically, we need to understand that these soldiers, the sepoys, come from the Indian villages. They accepted the job because they wanted to help their families survive, who were living in the villages, farmers basically. And when they came to know about their family in the villages suffering in the hands of British, because the British were demanding a lot of tax, were imposing taxes on them, rigid rules on them, and those people were, under poverty. And these soldiers, basically, they came from the village, their family was suffering, and this added more to their anger. And beyond all this, we had this belief those days that a Hindu belonging to the uppermost caste of the Brahmin, if he or she crosses the ocean, crosses the sea or ocean, and travels abroad to another country, then that is a huge sin. It means the person who belongs to the higher caste will lose his caste, will lose his respect, social respect, will lose his cycle of reincarnation. And that was believed those days. The soldiers who belonged to the upper caste were forced by the British to cross the oceans, to go abroad and fight for them, which they did not basically like, because it was against their religion, it was against their culture, tradition, and belief system. But the British did not understand that. The British resisted to give respect to the religious or traditional feelings, and they forced them to do it. And this added a huge amount of, which infuriated the soldiers. Well, when we talk about the crossing of ocean, one might think that how stupid it was, for Indians to think that crossing ocean was stupid. But you need to understand that it was not just India, even China, Japan, Korea, all these countries, they had this kind of belief those days that traveling across the ocean is a sin for various reasons which we do not know. But when we think in a different perspective, because we try to understand history according to the situation. And now the situation here is like we are all locked down and we are not allowed to travel from one country to another. The air services are paused, right? International traveling is banned. Now, we understand that if we travel to the other country, then we might get the disease and come back to our country and spread it. And now, the other countries are respecting the Indian tradition that we do not even shake hands with people. We just say namaste. We don't touch other people. We respect them by greeting them by a namaste. Now, the other countries feel that's one of the best traditions ever introduced, which avoids people, catching any kind of pandemic from a person coming from another country, from another continent. Maybe those days, the people might have been aware of these things, that people traveling from one continent to another continent or another country, there might be a possibility of getting a pandemic or disease and coming back and spreading it to us. Because, you know what? The tradition also says that if a person comes back from the country, he has to spend 3 years of isolation, and he has to take bath 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and night, and eat very little amount of food, and do all kind of rituals for the 3 years, isolating himself, and only then the person can be accepted by the society. Doesn't it sound like, isolation? What's happening, quarantine right now? Because this is just one of the perspectives that we get according to the situation, but we have no idea if that was the real truth behind it. But still, when we talk about traditions and culture, we cannot tell that that was foolish, that was stupid, because it was at that time. We need to look at history from the perspective of that particular timeline, not from now. Because when we talk about another 100 years, the future generations, they're going to talk bad about us. The cultures and traditions that we follow right now, for the next 100 years, they're going to think that's very stupid. So it's good for us to have different perspectives, not to have our personal opinions on one particular tradition or culture. Well, let's move on to the next topic. Well, while the peasants, the farmers, the kings, the regional leaders, the soldiers, they were all upset with the policies of British. Well, apart from this, the British did something which infuriated the common people. It means everyone in the country. They tried to poke their noses in the cultures and traditions that we have been following for a very long time. One example is that the British came up with Christian missionaries. What is Christian missionaries? A Christian missionaries are basically that the British brings in people from the Church of the United Kingdom to come back here and talk to the people in India and try to talk about Jesus Christ and his miracles and make the people believe in Jesus Christ. Well, most of them try to convince them to believe in Jesus Christ, to convert them into Christianity. That was basically the job of missionaries. Well, a part of missionary was trying to help the poor people near the seashores, the forest, trying to help them by giving them some money, education, trying to give them some Western education, trying to bring them some knowledge. And their job was to spread Christianity all over India. And the British at that time came up with a policy that the Indians who convert to Christianity, can inherit their ancestors' property. I'll repeat it once again. Indians who convert to Christianity, the Hindus, the Hindu Indians who convert to Christians, they can claim rights for their ancestral property. That was a policy that the British came up with, which infuriated the Indians, because that was basically trying to spread Christianity. And it was believed to be against Hinduism. And people felt that this was a huge threat against their religion. And this infuriated even a common man from the village to the urban area. And this created a huge hatred. Well, the British did this. They also did something else. Like they tried to abolish sati. Well, what is sati then? You would have heard about the ancient tradition, I would say medieval tradition, which was followed till even the last century as well, with the tradition of the wife jumping into the funeral pyre of her husband. It means like when the husband dies, the wife jumps into the funeral pyre, sacrifices her life as well, like going along with the husband to the heaven to, serve him, or to prove her purity, that she is a pure soul. And that was called sati, and it was practiced in many places around India. British tried to control it, and they tried to stop it, which was one of the very good job done by the British. Though the British were trying some sort with the missionary, this is one thing that we can appreciate the British tried to do, to stop sati. And they were indeed successful doing that with the support of a few Indian leaders like Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Well, we need to talk a little bit about this sati. What is this? Where did this originate from? When we talk about sati, we need to understand that there is no solid, concrete evidence from where this practice emerged from. But still, we have some clues after going through some articles from scholars, authors. We have a rough idea about how it began. But still, there are varied perceptions, different point of views of its emergence and beliefs. Well, the basic belief is that the sati is a word which means purity, right? And Sati is the wife of Lord Shiva. And there is a story, a mythological story, a Hindu mythological story. It goes like this, where Shiva's wife, Sati, gets infuriated and not angry because her father fails to respect Shiva, that is her husband, during a ceremony, which really made her feel bad because she felt that her husband was not given the due respect and he was insulted. So she became really angry and she immolated herself. She burned herself. Right? And while burning, she prayed that she has to reincarnate as Shiva's wife again. And that's how she re-emerged as Parvati. That's how the story goes. So the basic word sati and self-immolation, people believe that it had originated from this story. Well, some of them believe so, but we still do not have concrete evidence if it's really connected with that. Well, there is another perspective of this as well. Sati was a practice that it was not followed by all the states in India. It means like it was not a wide practice. If you take an example, some scholarly articles state that in Tamil Nadu, sati was not found in any scriptures because there are many examples of queens, living after the king's dying. And even Kannagi, an example, even she lived after her husband passed away. She did not follow sati or any scripture. Tamil scriptures did not show. So some scholars and researchers say that this sati had emerged from the western part of India, where particularly in Rajasthan, where the Rajputs were. And it was practiced by some Nepali, from parts of Nepal as well. Well, the scholars focus on Rajasthan. They say that the Rajput queens had this practice of immolating themselves. The practice was called jauhar. I think some of you would have watched the movie Padmavati, where you would have seen the hero and Deepika Padukone following that ritual at the end of the movie. Well, what happens is that the Rajput queens and all the women basically in the kingdom, they have this, belief or practice that if the kingdom falls, if the king fails, or if they know that the kingdom is going to be captured, and before the enemies arrive to their kingdom, arrive the fort, they have a separate, construction for all the women to enter and lock themselves and immolate, burn themselves and die as a ritual, as a sacrifice. And this was done to escape from the enemies, particularly from the Mughal invaders those days. Like Alauddin Khalji was the one who was trying to invade, the fort over there. Now, people say the western part of India was often prone to be attacked by the Mughals. And these Mughals, like Alauddin Khalji, were merciless. And if they get an opportunity, to enter the fort, defeating the kings, they win the war or a battle, then it's going to be really bad. And these Rajput women, they were considered as, the respect of the whole clan. So they did not want to, get captured by the enemies and stay as slaves for a long time and face all kind of, insults and torture. So better they felt that it's better to, immolate themselves and die. And scholars and many of them believe that this practice, example, this Rani Padmavati, once she immolated herself, the people started appreciating as a heroic attempt. And her stature was raised to God, and even temples were built in the name of Rani Padmavati, and people started praying to it. And then that became a standard for the people to believe as a respect for women. A woman who immolates herself, she would earn such a huge respect in the society after she passes away. So people believe that created a wave amongst the parts of India. They believe that was one of the reasons. Well, we do not know, because different authors and researchers have different perspectives of sati. Well, the British tried to, curb, and they did it successfully. And one of the most important person who involved in it was Raja Ram Mohan Roy. And we should be really happy that we had such kind of leaders who opposed staying in India, opposing the traditions of their own culture. And they successfully did it.